We begin today the Gemara towards the bottom of Chav Beis Amud Beis, 7 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. The Gemara that is brought here the machlokes of Rabbe and Rave regarding a simin ha'osui lidoris. When you have an item that has a simin on it, but it was found in the Rishus Harabim. In the Rishus Harabim, it's a place that people will step on it, and the simin that this object has could be removed. So Rabbe says such a kind of simin is not a simin. That is Rabbe. Simin also does Rabbe simin. Yeah. Rabbe says that no, a simin, even if it could get wiped off or stepped on, but still the owner relies that the simin is still there, and therefore he was never miyayish, so you can't keep it. You have to be machres this aveda. That was the machlekes. So the Gemara here brings from a braise to discuss this machlekes. This is actually a braise that will be a question on both Rabbe and Rave's opinion. Tashema says the Gemara, kriches b'rishus harab. The braise says if you have bundles, and the term kriches here in this braise refers to small bundles of grain that are on rishus harab. Sarei l'shaloi. Since it's found in the rishus harab, you can keep it. B'rishus hayachid, but if they're found in the rishus hayachid, let me just clarify what Rishus HaYachid means. Someone yesterday asked after the share about this Rishus HaYachid. It doesn't mean it's found in someone's private property. And so it's private property, belongs to that person. Rishus HaYachid means a place where it's not the middle of the street. It's in a field where things are planted there, and therefore people go there. It's an open place for people to go, but it's not a Rishus HaRabim where people are walking all the time. It's like a sort of a side place where things are planted, so not so many people walk there. That's the type of Rishus HaYachid.
So how are we going to call the Rishus HaYachid, the real thing?
No.
The property is...
It's also referred to as Rishus HaYachid, but it's just a different context. I'm just saying, in this context, this is what Rishus HaYachid means. So, Noitul Machres, if you find it in this Rishus HaYachid, so then you have to take it and you have to return it. But for Ha'alumos, if you find large bundles of grain, then Ben B'Rishus HaRabim, Ben B'Rishus HaYachid, regardless of where you find it, in Rishus HaRabim or Rishus HaYachid, Noitul Machres. You have to take it and call it out. You have to return it. So the question now is, Rabbe heichi mitaratzla. Rabbe that says that if you have something that has a siman on it and it's in the Rishus Harabim and people step on it, it loses its siman. How is he going to explain this? What's the difference here between the large bundles, the small bundles? Either way, it should be the same thing. People step on it and therefore it loses its siman. Why is there any distinction over here between large and small? And also, Rabbe heichi mitaratzla. Rav, according to his opinion, Rav says that there's no siman here. You can't say that if there's a siman, Rav holds that you always would have to return it. So Rav explained before, this case of kriches, also similar. The Mishnah in the beginning of the Perek says kriches, we're talking about something that has no siman. If it has no siman, what difference does it make if it's large bundles or small bundles? So the Gemara explains that Rabbe mitaretz l'taimei. Rabbe will explain according to his opinion, b'siman. We're talking over here about these bundles. Both the large and small bundles have a siman. The Gemara is going to explain in a second how he explains here the difference. And Rave mitaretz l'taimei, and Rave will explain according to his reasoning b'makim. As the Gemara already explained before, that Rave's opinion is that if you give the location of where the item was found, or according to Rashi, if you say, I found an item, and someone if you say, I found something in this location, and someone tells you which item is found in that location, the fact that you identify the item of that location, that itself is a siman. Mokkim is a siman. Because we don't assume that in the same spot, there were two of the same item. So therefore, that itself is a siman. That was Rava's opinion. So Rava will explain it according to his reasoning. And the Gemara explains. Rabbe explains according to his reasoning, b'simin, that these bundles have a siman. Now, what's the difference if it's large or small? Kriches b'rishus harabim, if you find the smaller bundles. So if it's found in the rishus harabim arei l'shaloi, you can keep it, and the reason is, like Rabbi said, mishom the midraseh, because in the rishus harabim, people step on it. So that's his opinion. Siman osi l'doris is not a siman. The person, we assume that the owner gave up on it as yush. But B'Rishus HaYachid, if it's in a more private place, so then Neitul Machres, this you do have to announce and return. Because the Loi Midrasa, in the B'Rishus HaYachid, people don't walk there as much, so therefore the siman remains and you have to return it. But for Ha'alumais, if it's larger bundles, here I say, Bein B'Rishus HaRabim, Bein B'Rishus HaYachid, wherever it is, Neitul Machres, you have to return it, because Kivin, the Gvion, because it's larger and it's taller, Loi Midrasa, it doesn't get stepped upon. People go around it. So therefore the siman that it has will remain. So therefore it doesn't matter where it is, even in Rishus Harabim, you're going to have to return it. And Rav explains the difference between the large and small bundles, according to his opinion, that b'makayim, that with the siman over here is the spot, the place where it was found. So kriches b'reshus harabim arei l'shaloi. When you find smaller bundles in reshus harabim, the reason you can keep it is the menashtefe, because people kick it, and therefore it doesn't remain in the spot where the person lost it. It gets kicked to a different place. So now the owner gives up on this. He doesn't think to himself, "Oh, I'll be able to identify the spot where it was, and that's going to be my siman." No, it's not going to be there in the same spot. But if it's in a more private area, so there you have to announce it and return because that's a place where the spot where he lost it or left it, he's going to say the siman that's where it is, and he therefore get it back. But the larger bundles, either way it is, you have to return it because kivin the yakiri, because it's heavier, it's larger and heavier, it's not going to roll, it's not going to be kicked away from its spot. So he's going to be able to give the siman of the spot where it was found. Tashama, the Gemara says, let's bring a raya to this machlokes about the siman also lidaris. What did it say in the Mishnah in the beginning of the Peirik? Kikrish shel nachtem. You find the bread that's made from a baker. So that doesn't have a siman. The baker makes all the breads in the same. So since there's no siman, arei l'shaloi. You find it, the owner's miyayish, you can keep it. So the Gemara says, what do I see from that Mishnah? Ha shel balabayis. But if this would be bread that's baked privately by a private homeowner, then chayiv lachris. This is something that you do have to announce and you do have to return. Rashi here points out that the Gemara here is medayik this from the Reisha, from the Mishnah that we had in the beginning of the Peirik. The truth is, this is a befedish Mishnah later in the Peirik here, where it says kikre shel balabais, you have to return. Because the Gemara before was discussing the first Mishnah, so it's asking this based on what it says in the first Mishnah. But the Gemara's question now is, shel balabais my time. Even if it's bread that's baked from a balabayis, it's a privately baked bread, and it has a siman on it, and it was left and found in the Rishus Harabim, why should you have to return it? According to Rabbi, Kivin the Isbu siman. So he's saying the reason you would have to return it is because it has a siman. The May, the Yediyah, Rifte, the Inish. One second. I think this is already the answer over here. No? No, this is all part of the question. But when you get to this bread, why is there any distinction between the bread of a nachtoim, of a baker, and the bread of a private owner? So the reason is because given the isbo siman, because it has a siman, the made the idea rifted the inishu, the bread that a person breaks privately, you can see, he can notice the siman that this is his bread that he made. So if so, there should be no difference in whether it's found in the Rishus Harabim or it's found in the Rishus Hayachid. And therefore, this bread you have to call out. But the thing is, what do you see from here? Alma, I see siman osilidaris have a siman, that is siman that people step upon, and it's still going to be a siman, because here we see from the Mishnah and the Diak, from the Mishnah and the Reisha, in the beginning of the Peirik, that the bread that's from a baker, even if you find it in the Rishus Harabim, it's still a good siman, even though people are going to step over it. So why? So you see here, this is a question on Rabbi that says siman osilidaris is not a siman. To Yufta the Rabbi refutes Rabbi's opinion. So Amalach Rabbi will answer you. Hossam, when it comes to bread, it's a different story. When it comes to bread, you're not supposed to pass through food that's on the floor without picking it up. Rashi, Taisus here clarify, doesn't literally mean that you shouldn't step on it. It means that when you see bread, you should not just walk by it. You should pick it up. So therefore, this is not, when you find bread on the Rishus Harabim, there's no reason to think that people stepped on it or people just left it there, and therefore the siman is going to get ruined. The siman is not going to get ruined. It's going to be picked up. So the person that lost it is not miyayish if he has a siman, if it's bread that is made from a balabayis. But there are goyim though that can leave it there and will step on it. Says the Gemara, no, even the goyim don't step on it. The goyim, they see a loaf of bread that's left in the middle of the floor, on the ground, in the Rishus Harabim, they're afraid that there's some kind of kishuf here, and therefore they're going to go around it, even if they won't pick it up, but they're not going to step on it. It's like the Gemara, klovim, there are animals, there are dogs that walk and step on it. Answers the Gemara, we have to say that this mission is talking about a place where there is not animals or dogs found there that will step on it and ruin the siman, according to Rabbi. So therefore, there's still a siman over here. So the Gemara, shall we say that the machlokes of Rabbi and Rave, whether a siman that could be stepped upon, does the owner still rely on the siman or not? So machlokes tanoim. Why? Because we learned in the first Mishnah, it said, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, Kol davar sheyesh bo shinoi. If you find any item that has something that's unusual about it, chayav la'achris. So you have to return it. And what's the examples he gives? Keitzat, matzah igul ubetoiche cheres. You find the pressed figs that are made like a round circle, and inside of it you find a piece of earthenware. Or a kikar, a loaf of bread, ubetoiche mois. And inside of it you find a coin, you find money. So this is something which is unusual, it's a siman, and therefore you have to return it even if it's found in the Rishus HaRabim. So now this is Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara Miklal. From this we understand the Tanakama that the Tanakama holds, even though you have these unusual things here in this item that you find, but still you don't have to return it. You can keep it. So what's the explanation for the machlokes here? Rabbi Yehuda is right. It has something unusual. There's a very good siman. So why shouldn't you have to return it? As we'll see here in the Gemara, this the subject here that we're discussing now has three different aspects that this is dependent upon, as the Gemara will explain. So Savrua, first, the first svara that they had to explain the machlokes of the Tanakama and of Yehuda was as follows. The Kula Alma, everybody agrees, simin haba me'elov have a simin. When you have a simin, that it could be that this just happened on its own. The person didn't place the piece of earthenware into his figs. The person didn't place money into his bread. It just fell inside, into the dough or into the figs as he was making it. So you may think that this is something that the person is not even aware of. But no, we say that siman haba me'elov is a siman. Rashi's pshat in this is because we assume that the person actually put it there and he actually does know about it. Tosfos says no, that what the Gemara means to say is even if it fell in on its own, but the person then noticed it afterwards. He realized that this is there and he left it there. So therefore, even though it could be something that fell on its own, it's a siman. That everybody agrees to. And also another point, going back to what we mentioned before regarding food, right now the Gemara says, to explain this machlokes of the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, umaviren ala eichlin. Everybody holds when you see food on the ground, in the Rishus HaRabim, you can walk past the food and you're allowed to leave it there. So now this will explain here, if so, we could say the machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda is as follows. So my love, don't you think, b'simin ha'osil lidaris kamiflagi. So again, as we said, this is a case where there is a simin here, because there's something unusual inside. And this is a case where people will step on it, because you're allowed to leave the food on the floor. So what are they arguing about? They're arguing about this, whether this that has a siman, but it's osil lidaris. People will step on it if that's still a siman that the balabas relies on. Mar Sava, lo have a siman. The Tanakama says it's not a siman. Or Mar Sava, and then Rabbi Yehuda is coming to say, have a siman. That it's in the Rishus HaRabim and people will step on it, but it doesn't matter, it's still a siman. So this is one way to explain the machlokes of Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama. They're arguing on the exact point that Rabba and Rava argued about. So the Gemara now explains, no, as we saw already here, and the way the Gemara suggests this, that this is totally in other details here. And therefore we could say that the machlokes is different. Amar Rav Zvid, Mishmei de Rave. So Rav Zvid says in the name of Rave like this. First, Rav Zvid says you can't say the pshat you said, because Isal Kedaitoch, if you're going to say it's true, that Tanakama, that Sava Tanakama, the Tanakama holds, Simin also lidoris, lo have a simin, that any time there's a simin, that people step on it, it's not a simin, and umaviren ala eichlin, and people walk on bread and food, so it's something which gets stepped upon. So kikrei shel balabayis, b'rishus harabim amay machres. So then why is it that if you have, the Tanakama also holds, he says it beferish in the Mishnah later, the Gemara was medayik before from the Reisha. Why does it say that if you have a loaf of bread which is made by a private person and it has a siman on it and it's in Rishus HaRabim, the Tanakama agrees that in such a case you have to return it. Why do you have to return it? Even if it has a siman, but if you're going to say that the Tanakama holds that if it's osil lidoris, if people step on it, it's not a siman, why do you have to return this? So that can't be the pshat in the Tanakama's opinion. So Rav Zvid explains in the name of Rave that the pshat is as follows. The kula amasavri siman osil lidoris have a siman. Really, Rave says everybody holds like my opinion that a siman that you step upon is still a siman. And also everybody holds mavirin ala eichlin. Everybody holds that people are allowed to leave the bread on the floor, and therefore people will step on it. So this is a siman that people will step upon it. But it's still a good siman though. But v'hacha, what's the argument? And the other point that we mentioned before, b'siman haba me'elov kamifligi. They're arguing we have a siman that it could be. It's very possible that the owner is not even aware of the siman. It just fell into the dough. A coin fell into the dough, or a piece of earthenware fell into these figs. Tanakama sava siman haba me'elov have a siman. A siman like this that could come by itself, and the owner is not aware of it, is not a siman because we assume that he doesn't even know about the siman, so he gave up on it. It's a Yush. Rav Yehuda Savar have a siman. Rav Yehuda says, no, even a siman that could have came on its own is a siman, so there's no Yush. That's the point of the machlekes. Similar, Rabbi explains also, according to his opinion, again, Rabbi's opinion is that siman asir lidoris is not a siman. So Rabbi Amalach, Rabbi will tell you, the kula alme siman asir lidoris lo have a siman. Everybody over here, the Tanakama, Rabbi Yehuda, all agree that a siman that you step upon this is not a siman. And ve'eim avirin aloichlin. People don't step on the food, but you're not allowed to just leave food on the floor that you're passing by. So therefore, according to Rabbi, this is food, a bread that's left on the floor. People are not going to step on it. As we explained before, the same thing, that the argument is regarding a siman that could have come on its own. Tanakama Sava lo have a siman, and Rav Yehuda Sava have a siman. Same explanation. The Gemara goes through a similar discussion here in another version of what was the initial way that the Amiraim thought to explain the machlokes of Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says like this: Ikeda Amri, there were those that said that they initially started off with a different explanation of how to explain the machlokes. That Savrua, the first svara to explain the machlokes of the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda was as follows: that the Kula Alma, everybody agrees, Siman Abba Me'elav, have a siman. That if it's a siman that could have come on its own, that it is a siman. And everybody also agrees, v'siman asir lidoris lo have a siman. And everybody holds like Rabbe, that a siman that could be stepped upon is not a siman. So my love, so there, if so, how can we explain the machlokes over here? What they're arguing is whether when you see food on the floor, will you leave it on the floor? The marsavar mavirin. So the first opinion here is that Tanakama says that people leave the food on the floor. You don't have to pick it up. So if you leave it on the floor, since everybody holds siman or asir lidoris is not a good siman, and you're allowed to leave it on the floor, so people will step on it. So it's not a good siman. But Amar Sava, Rabbi Yehuda says, Ei mavirin. You're not allowed to pass by food and just leave it there, so it's not a siman that people will step on. It's going to be picked up. That's the basis of the machlokes. And on this, Amar Rav Zvid Mishmei de Rave, Rav Zvid says again, in the name of Rave, you can't say this. As we explained already before, if you're going to say the Tanakama holds that when you step on something, it's not a siman. And the Tanakama holds that you're allowed to leave food on the floor. So then, why when it comes to bread that has a siman, because it was baked by a balabayas, why does the Tanakama say you have to return it? It's something which people are going to step on. So it's going to lose its siman. So Rav Zvid, Mishmei de Rave. So therefore, as we explained already before, Rav Zvid said in the name of Rave, the Kula Alma Savri, everybody holds, siman also lidoris have a siman. A siman that you step on it, like this is Rav's opinion, that is, it is a good siman. When you're allowed to pass by bread and leave it on the floor. Here, the argument is regarding a siman that could have come on its own. The Tanakama siman. Tanakama says it is a siman. That siman haba me'elov. Again, let me read that again. The Tanakama savar siman haba me'elov lo yav a siman. That it's not a good siman. That's what the Tanakama says. That this you don't have to return. But Rabbi Yehuda savar have a siman. And Rabbi Yehuda says no, that it is a good siman. And the Rabbi Amalach, and Rabbi will tell you, according to his reasoning, the kulam siman asir lidoris lo yav a siman. Everybody agrees that if it's stepped upon, then it's not going to be a good siman. And ve'eim avirin aloichlin. So over here, though, when it comes to bread, people do not step on this bread because you're not allowed to leave it on the floor. And v'hacha b'siman haba me'elov kemiflagi. Here, the argument is regarding a siman that came on its own, that could have come on its own. Tanakama savar siman haba me'elov lo yav a siman. Tanakama says it's not a siman. Rav Yehuda savar have a siman, as I explained already before. Okay, now after all this discussion, the Gemara here brings halachas, the conclusion. Amar Rav Zvid, Mishmei de Rave. Rav Zvid said in the name of Rave, Klala da avedete, the klal, the halacha regarding an aveda is, Kivin da ama vay l'chesar and kiss, miyayish shla. When you hear miyayish leminei, you hear a person that he says that he's vay, he's saying the vay that he lost this thing from his pocket, that's yish, that's he gave up, and then when you pick it up as an aveda, you don't have to return it. Rav Zvid said in the name of Rave as well that Hilchase, the halacha is krichais b'reshus harabim. If you find bundles in the reshus harabim, harei l'shaloi, you can keep it. If you find it b'reshus hayachid, but if you find the krichas in the reshus hayachid, so then it depends. If you find it, then you could see that the person didn't just leave it there in that spot. It's just he just fell out of his pocket, fell out of his bag. He didn't realize. Then harei l'shaloi. Then this is yours. And the reason is because what kind of a simon is he going to give for this? It doesn't have a simon. And even the spot, the makayim, where it fell, he also won't be able to tell you because it just fell out of his bag. He didn't notice where it fell. So whether it's in Rishus Rabim, the makayim is not a simon. Even in Rishus Yachid, if it's derech nefila, it's not a simon either. But if you see it's in a Rishus Yachid, and the person left it there intentionally, and now you can see that it was left there for a very long time, and you're afraid that the person forgot about it, and therefore you want to return it to him, so then you have the mitzvah of Shavas Aveda to go and return it to him. And the reason is because the person knows the spot where he left it. In the Rishus Rabim, there's no such a thing. Even if you put a derech hanocha in one place, as the Gemara said before, it doesn't stay in that place. But in the Rishus Yachid, you leave it there, so then you can give it back to the person. And v'zeh, now both of these halachas that we just said is all b'davar she'en by siman. We're talking here about these krichas, these bundles of grain that don't have a siman. Aval b'davar she'yesh by siman. If it's something that has a siman, and this is Rava's opinion, lo yishna b'rishus harabim, v'lo yishna b'rishus hayachid. It doesn't make a difference where it was found, whether rishus harabim, whether rishus hayachid, bein derech nefila, whether you see that it fell from the person's bag, bein derech hanocha, or whether you can tell that it was placed there. Chayev lahachriz, you have to return it, and the reason is Rava's opinion is even though it's also lidaris, people step on it, but it's still a siman that the owner relies upon. He's not miyayish, so you still have the mitzvah of a Shavas Aveda. Okay, the Gemara continues with the next thing that it said in the Mishnah, that if you find it, you don't have to return it. So the Mishnah said, if you find the ring of fish that are placed on a string, so that's something that it has no siman, and you don't have to return. Why doesn't this have a siman? Amai lehavi kesha siman. Why don't you have to return it? Why shouldn't the knot that's made in this ring or this string? Why shouldn't it be a siman? And says the Gemara bekatra de tzayde. This is a knot that all of the fish catchers make. The kula alma hachim bekatri. They all make the same knot, so there's no unique knot that you can give a siman for this. Frek the Gemara v'lehavi minyan siman. The number of fish that are here on the string, why isn't that a siman? Answers the Gemara, ben minyana de shavin, because it's a number of fish that is always equally. This is the kind of number of fish that's placed on this ring or on this string. All do it the same, so it's not a siman. Now this subject about a minyan, when you want to identify something by its number, so the Shaila was asked from Rav Sheshes. Minyan have a siman or la have a siman? The number of something, is that a siman or not? Amul Rav Sheshes says Tnisu. We learned this in a Braise. It says Matzikli Kesef. You find silver kalim or kli nechayches, copper or gastrin shel avar, a piece of lead, v'chol kli matches, any other metal kalim. Harezel yachser. You don't have to return it achiyitin ois until the person gives you a simin. Or he can tell you the weight of this. So now the Gemara says here. It says that weight is a simin. But the mishkal have a simin. If the weight of something is a simin, so then midah, the measurement, the size of it, and uminion, and also the number of it is the same concept. It's also nami have a simin. It's also going to be a simin. The next thing is said in the Mishnah was you find a piece of meat, you don't have to return it. The Gemara, based on what we just learned before, why don't you have to return it? Why shouldn't the weight of this piece of meat be a simin? Answers the Gemara, this is the weight of the meat that the butchers all cut in similar weight and size, so therefore it's not a simin. But the type of piece of meat that is, that itself should be a siman. And what is Gemara referring to? Whether this is a piece of meat that comes from the neck of the animal, or the atma, or from the thigh. So if you could identify from which section of the animal it is, that itself should be a sim. Didn't we learn in a braise? Person finds pieces of fish, or v'dog noshoch, a piece of fish that was bitten into. Chayiv la'achriz is something that you have to return. So the Gemara's question here is from the first thing that it said in this braisa. Chaticha shel dog, pieces of fish you have to return. Why? Probably because you can identify from which section of the fish it is. So that's enough of a siman. The Gemara brings the continuation of the braisa. Chavi yeshayayin, you find barrels of wine, of v'shel shemen, barrels of oil, v'shel tvua, barrels that have in it also grain, of v'shel greigeris, figs, v'shel zeisim, olives, harei l'shaloi. These barrels you can keep. So the Gemara now answers its question regarding the pieces of meat. Is that a siman that you could identify the piece, which part of the fish or the animal it's from? So the Gemara says it's not a siman. The Braisa says by the pieces of fish that it's a siman. What is this Braisa talking about? Because here it's a fish that was cut in a unique way. The way it was cut is the cut itself is the siman. The Gemara brings an example for this. When he would have the meat delivered to him, he had it cut in a triangle. And the reason for this is because it was being delivered by a guy and he wanted to make sure that he didn't exchange it with meat that's not kosher. So this was a siman that he had, that this is the meat, that the kosher meat that he sent to his wife, and therefore he made it in a triangle. So when it says there in the Braise, chatichas dogim, it's not a stira to what it said in the Mishnah, that a piece of meat, there's no simon for this. If you could identify that it's from the neck or from another part of the animal, that's not enough of a simon. It has to be a unique kind of cut. And the Gemara brings a ayah to this. Tekanami, I'll prove to you that this is the pshat of the Braisa, because the tani dumye, the dog nashuch. It mentions here the pieces of fish that there's a siman, and right afterwards it says a fish that it was bitten. So just like the fish that was bitten is unique, has something unique in it that it was bitten, so too the size of the way this fish is cut has to be something unique. That's the siman. Shema Mino, that proves that that's the pshat on that Braisa. The Gemara goes back to another thing that was mentioned here in this Braisa, the barrels that were found. The Braisa says you find a barrel of wine, you don't have to return it. The Tan of the Braisa said, you find a barrel of wine, or v'shal shemen or oil, or v'shal tvue, grain, v'shal gregidis or figs, v'shal zeisim, olives, all of these you can keep. Fragt the Gemara, but v'atanan, there's a Mishnah later that says, kade yayin, v'kade shemen, you find the jugs of wine or of oil, chayiv la'achris, you do have to return it. So this is a contradiction. So Rav Zera answers in the name of Rav. Masnisen, in the Mishnah, where it says that you have to return it, it's talking about beroshum, where there's a mark on it. Rashi's pshat on this is that you had the winemakers. The winemakers would bring their wine in certain months. Rashi says between Shvat and Nisan. The wine is usually made in Tishrei time. They would bring their wines between Shvat and Nisan to the store owners to sell the wine for them, or to buy off the wine from them and sell it. So they would bring the wine and they would open it up and taste the wine, and then afterwards they would close it back up. If they weren't selling it right away, they would close it back up, and then they would seal it very well with the cement or with something that would be sealed very well. And this sealing that was sealed very well, that's what's called roshum. And this roshum, this sealing itself, is this siman. That's Rashi's pshat. And we're talking about over here in a time where many people do not close it up this way. Only a few people close it up this way, sealed this kind of way. So if you give this as a siman, then we know that it's yours. That's what Roshim means. Other Rishonim say that Roshim means more like what it sounds literally in the Lashon of the Gemara. Roshim means is some kind of a mark that it has in the ceiling that it's yours. It's not just a regular kind of a ceiling. That's what the that's what the Mishnah is talking about when it says that you have to return it. So the Gemara asks, but how are we going to explain the pshat in the Braise? When the Braise says that you can keep it, so meklal the Braise with pasuach. Do you mean to say that in the Braise, it's speaking about you found a barrel of wine which was not sealed closed? In other words, it's totally open. Even Pasuach, if it's tototally open, then Avedi Midasi. And this is something where the owner just left and gave up on it, because leaving a barrel of wine open is something where whatever it is will crawl into it and will destroy it, so there's no reason to return this. So it's Pashut. Why would the Braise have to say that you don't have to return this? It's Avedi Midas. Rav Ashi explains, no, it doesn't mean that it was left completely uncovered, but rather b'meitzif. When the person puts upon the opening, he puts a cover. Meitzif literally means it's floating, but it means he puts on top the cover, even if he doesn't seal it well. In such a case, if it doesn't have that special sealing, so there's no simin, and you have to return it. The Mishnah was talking about when there were certain chenvenim that sealed it very well, and there was only a few of them that did this, and therefore that is a simin. Abaye says, based on this siman of Roshim, when it's sealed well, so we can say like this: both in the Mishnah and in the Braise, it's speaking about you found a barrel of wine that's sealed very well. And there's no contradiction here whether you have to return it or not. When it says in the Mishnah that you have to return it, it's before the time period when the storehouses of the wine are opened up. It's early in the season where the winemakers are not yet bringing the wine to the store owners. And therefore, if you have this wine that was opened up to taste, and then afterwards it was sealed back very well, there was only a few winemakers that did that brought their wine already to the store seller, to the store owners. So therefore, if you find this wine with this sealing, it's a good simon. And but then the Braisa, though, speaking about later in the season, where all the winemakers already brought their wine to the stores, and therefore everybody already has their wine that they opened and they tasted and they sealed it back this way. So it's all sealed this way. So it's not going to be a simon anymore. The Gemara brings a source for this. Rav Yaakov bar Abba Ashka Chavita de Chamre. Rav Yaakov bar Abba found a barrel of wine after the time period where all the wine was already taken out from the cellars of the winemakers. Also, Abaye asked Abaye whether you can keep it. You can keep it for yourself because there's no simon to this. Rav Beva asked Rav Nachman. This is something we discussed before. Makaim have a simon. The place where you find something. Is that if you can identify the place where you found it, is that a simon or do you have a simon? Or is it not a simon? Amalei, so Rav Nachman answered, Tenisua. We learned it here in this Braisa. You find a barrel of wine, or v'shel shemen, or oil, v'shel tvuah, or grain, v'shel gregidis, v'shel zeisim, arei l'shaloi. You can keep it because the barrels itself, as we just explained, don't have a simon. Now, v'yisol gedait of the mokim have a simon. If the spot where it was found is a simon, lichriz mokim. Why don't you have to return it? You can return it by the place where it was found. Rav Zvid answers, no, here in this Braisa, even the place will not be a simon. It was found by the river, by the edge of the river, and that's a place where the boats arrive with all kinds of merchandise and produce, and everything is unloaded over there in that area. So the makim over here is not going to be a simon, because just like the Gemara is soon going to explain that everybody brings their stuff here. So you can't say, oh, my thing was in this spot. It could be someone else's in the same spot as well, of the same item. Amar of Mari, my time, Amar Rabbanan. Arak said the not have a simon. So the Gemara explains. Why is it by the edge of the river that it's not a simon? Damrinan lay, because we say to this person that identified the spot where it was found, just like you had your item there in that place, your friend has the same merchandise or the same item in that place as well. There's another version to this regarding this Raksa Denare that went even a step further. Amar Rav Mari said, my time Rabbanon Mokim have a simon. Why did the Rabbanon say that Mokim is not a simon? Now Rashi explains that in this version what it's trying to say is, it's not just speaking about any random location by the edge of the river. It's saying even if you find something that it's put in a specific spot, like in a corner, somewhere in a specific spot, a mokim, by the edge of the river, it's still not going to be a simon. Even there, we're going to say, even though it's a very specific sort of a private place that you put it by the edge of the river, but it could be your friend also wanted to hide it over there in that spot. So therefore, it's not going to be a simon. That's the nafkamina here between the two lashonos. In the first lashon, it's not talking about where it's like a specific spot in the Raksa Denara. Talk to Gemara, who gavre, there was an individual, the Ashkach Kufre Be Matzarta. He found tar or pitch by the press, by the olive press. Asla Kamede Rav, he came to ask Rav whether he can keep this or not. Amalei Zilshkal Nafshech, you can keep it, has no simon, and you find it in a certain place, and the place is not a simon, so you can keep it. He saw that he was hesitant to keep it. Amalei, so he told him, Zil Plegle Lechi Birimine. You can go and divide half for yourself and half give for my son. He wanted to show him how sure he is that there's no problem. You can keep it. You can give even half to my son. So the Gemara explains what's the basis of Rav's opinion that you can keep it. Should we say that the point there is because Rav holds Makkah le'av a simon to identify the place where it was found. That's not a simon. So Rabab explained no. It's a different reason here. Mishum Yiyosh Bailim Naguba. The reason why Rav said over here that you can keep it is because Rav saw that the owner must have definitely already given up on this. And the reason is the Chazeh, the Katchi Bechilfe. He saw that in this pitch there was this grass, weeds that was growing out of it because it was left there for a very long period of time. And that's the reason why he said that he can keep it.